Welcome back to investments. Let's move on to chapter 5, which I consider to be kind of the core or the essence of this investments course. I know that many people, when you talk about investments, they think stocks and bonds. When I think investments, I think about managing someone's portfolio. I think a little bit bigger picture than just stocks and bonds. Yes, we will get into more details about stocks and bonds, but let's keep our focus on managing the overall portfolio. So in chapter 5, we're going to talk about the portfolio management process. We'll talk about asset allocation, and we'll talk about the definition and goals of financial planning. We've already talked about some of these topics, and portfolio management. So, one caveat, one old Jewish saying, man plans and God laughs. So you've got to have a plan, but you've got to be flexible. And this is the case with your life. Do your best to plan, but also you've got to roll with the punches. Let me check and make sure that we are recording here. Make sure everything's good. And it looks like we are recording here, so let's move on. All right, so what is financial planning? Financial planning. Okay, so investment management is a subset of financial planning. All right, financial planning is proactively, okay, dealing with the financial dimension of your life. I can't tell you how many people that I have worked with that don't have any financial plans in place. I recently had a good friend of mine pass away, 75 years old. I did a lot of work for him in investment management for an organization that he headed up. So he was the CEO of a large organization. He was an attorney, and he has a stepson who works for a brokerage firm, and because of that, I never really talked to him about his financial planning. And I am brokenhearted to find out that he did very little financial planning, and his stepson did not step in to take care of that for them. And so the widow is going to have a heck of a time untangling all the assets that they own, making sure who owns what, where everything is located, how everything is going to be passed along. Everything will probably go to her, and then from her to the children, but it's going to take a couple of years to get it sorted out. And when you lose somebody close to you, the last thing you want to do is have to deal with an estate that isn't taken care of. Okay? All right. You want to be respectful when it comes to people's assets and money and financial planning, and you want to defer to close relationships you think they have. But sometimes those assumptions, the assumption that I made that the stepson would take care of it, was a dangerous assumption for them. All right, so financial planning includes the following topics. Budgeting, okay? It all starts with budgeting. Saving and investing, which comes from the budgeting process, okay? Financing purchases, that's debt management, okay? Education and retirement planning, okay? So that's saving for children's education and also saving for retirement, okay? Taxes, understanding how taxes can be managed. Insurance, making sure that you have the right insurance products in the right amounts, with the right terms, paying the right premiums. And then estate planning, which is determining how assets will be passed along upon your death. And then I added debt management, but I just realized that's redundant because we have financing purchases up here, and that's what debt management is. Financing purchases. All right. So to do a little bit of pre-planning homework, first you determine your lifestyle, goals, and needs. What kind of life do you want to live? Okay? What do you want out of your life? What's most important? You got to sit down and think about these things. Okay? Educate yourself regarding income and expenses. How much can you make? What are you capable of doing? How much will it cost to live? Where do you want to live? Okay? So there's a lot of thinking that goes into this. All right? So income, likely income and benefits your skills will generate. So what skills do you want to have? You need to think about that as you're going into college. Maybe even after you graduate and you start working, you can think about what skills do I have? What skills do I want to have? How much income can I make? Okay? Look at Social Security benefits. Look at inheritance. You need to talk with your parents. You need to talk with your grandparents about inheritance. When it comes to expenses, where do you want to live? Which is somewhat controllable. Okay? How long do you think you'll live, which is less controllable? You have to look at your family tree and see some families have a lot of time and longevity in their family tree, and some people don't. All right, and so how long you're going to live and where you're going to live have a lot to do with your expenses. Major categories of expenses include housing. Okay, and you got to shop around. I'm telling you that housing in the Midwest is relatively cheap. Then you get into coastal areas, Northeast, and over there in California, you go over to Nashville. Any of the hot growing markets are going to be much more expensive. And you can make more money on real estate as long as you catch the prices and you're right and you catch the cycle right. The last thing you want to do is invest in housing toward the tail end of a cycle, and then you get caught in a downturn. It could absolutely wipe you out. Okay? Transportation, okay, how much you're going to pay for your cars. Insurance, education, medical costs, taxes, and food. You need to have food in there. We have housing, we don't have food. And we need to have food in there because that's a major cost of living. All right, so let's develop a written plan. We'll start with a simple budget. Your plan should have financial goals and a timeline. How much you want to save, use some reasonable assumptions about rates of return, and how much you want to have along the way. Okay? Your plan should help you retain cash on a regular basis, which is your savings. Okay? Then you make living decisions and spending decisions and saving decisions and investment decisions that are consistent with your plan. Let me tell you something. If you come up with a plan and every month you find a reason, oh, it's just a one-time thing, to spend money, then you're not going to stick with your plan at all. Throw your plan away. Okay? Don't do that. Check your status regularly. You know, I would say maybe twice a year. Check to see where you are. There are a lot of tools out there now that can help you with budgeting. There are a lot of tools out there that can tell you what your net worth is. Yeah, my advice to you is don't be checking your net worth on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis. Quarterly at the most. It will drive you crazy and it will hurt you. It will not help you. All right? You don't want to get overwhelmed by short-term noise. I can't tell you, you start listening to CNBC, you start listening to Fox, you start listening to CNN, and the sky is falling every single day, and you don't want to get caught up in that. Okay? Be disciplined with your plan, but adjust your plan if necessary. Once you make your plan, you have to check it to see if you're being realistic. All right? And work with a professional when the time is right. And you can start working with a professional immediately out of school. You should be able to find someone who will be willing to kind of give you the basics, which you're learning here, and you can start on those things until you accumulate enough wealth that you can start paying a professional to help you. Okay? So you can get some help on the front end, as I just said. All right. Investing is a subset of financial planning. Let's see how far we're supposed to go in this clip. We're supposed to go through 8 slides. Let's escape here and see, because it looks like we don't have, so we're on slide number 4. So bear with me here, and we're going to insert, and slide number, where is the slide number? Let's insert. How come it isn't on here? Header and footer. It's supposed to say slide number. There it is. Slide number, apply to all, and there we go. All right, so we're good to go. Sorry for that little break there. Here we go. So, investing is a subset of financial planning. And so now we're going to look at portfolio management. And managing a portfolio, just like financial planning, is a continuous process. And we're going to start by developing an investment policy statement. So you have a financial plan, and within that financial plan, you have an investment plan, otherwise known as an investment policy statement. And it must be written, all right? When you write something down, you have to think about it, okay? And so writing, if for no other reason, it really forces you to sit down and get organized with your thinking, okay? It takes intense effort to accurately write. It is also a record for everyone to see. It is protection for the client and for the manager. So if you or your parents have a portfolio, they better have an investment policy statement, okay? The manager and the client must use the policy statement as the basis for controlling the composition of the portfolio, for assessing the goals of the portfolio. So the makeup of the portfolio is determined by the policy statement. The goals of the portfolio are based on the policy statement, all contained in the policy statement, and how we evaluate the performance of the portfolio is all included in the investment policy statement. Okay? For example, a client and a manager agree to set up a portfolio to generate current income of 6% of the portfolio. So that's a lot. That's a high current income because dividend yields and interest rates are not at 6%. So you're really going to have to work to get 6% income out of the portfolio. So the manager agrees to do this, but explains that there is a negative relationship between income and capital appreciation. The more income you want out of your portfolio, the less capital appreciation you're going to get out of your portfolio. So again, it is the investment manager's job to explain to the client how the investment world works. And so if the client says, no, I've got to have a certain stream of income, I've got $1 million and I need $60,000 a year coming out of the portfolio, that's 6%, okay? So you have to explain, if I set the portfolio up this way, chances are you're not going to keep up with the overall stock market in terms of capital appreciation, okay? So the more income you want, the less capital gain you're likely to realize. Manager explains that. The implication is that if the market zooms up, the portfolio probably won't keep up, okay? A year later, the market is up 20% and the portfolio is up 16%. The client then calls and complains to you, the manager. The manager has the investment policy statement as a basis for his or her defense. Remember, in America, anyone can sue anyone for anything. So as a manager, you have to protect yourself, and you have to add value to the client by explaining how the markets work and what realistic expectations are. The client has that policy to protect himself or herself. The manager has that investment policy statement to protect himself or herself. Okay? And I've had these conversations before with clients. It's like, 60% of your portfolio is in stocks and 40% is in bonds. Why? Because we discuss the returns and the risks involved, and we discuss your emotional needs, your financial needs, and your investment time horizon, and we all agreed on the front end that 60-40 was an appropriate mix of investments or an asset allocation for you. And now you're complaining that you didn't keep up with a portfolio that's 100% in the stock market. And by the way, you're using the S&P 500, whereas the Russell Mid-Cap and the S&P 500 Mid-Cap and the Russell 2000 Small Cap indexes didn't do nearly as well as the S&P 500. You are cherry picking, okay? Don't do that. Don't do that. All right. So the investment policy statement also forces discipline, okay? You must stick with the policies. For example, your policy specifies that the maximum stock exposure of the portfolio is 65% of the portfolio, of the total value of the portfolio, all right? The limit for bonds is 35%. The stock exposure is actually 60% at the beginning of the year. So the actual stock exposure, your maximum is 65%, we're actually at 60%, and the bond exposure is 35%, which means 5% is in money market fund, okay? balances in cash or money market fund. Okay? The stock market rises 20% during the year, so we had a great year. You started off at 60%, so the stock portion of the portfolio also does well, and the bond market is flat. So what happens to the stock and bond exposure of the portfolio? Well, the ending stock exposure is 60% times 1.2, that's a 20% increase, 72%. Guess what? We're over our limit. Okay? The bond exposure is 100% minus 72%, plus the 5%, the bond exposure is 23%. Okay? If you stick with the investment policies, you'll have to sell some stocks, trim that 72%, okay, and put it into bonds or money market funds. So, the point is that the investment policies give you targets, and as an investment manager, when you put your name on that investment policy and the client signs that investment policy, that's a contract. And that says, if you let this thing run up to 72, 75%, and then we have a 40% correction in the stock market, the client can sue you, and the client will win. So you, as an investment manager, you have to remind the client, now this is our stock exposure, our limit 65%, this is what we're going to do, this is what we agreed to do, and this is what we're going to do. Now, I do want to point out before we leave this slide that the process of buying and selling securities to bring a portfolio back into line with the long-term asset allocation percentages, in this case 65-35, is called rebalancing. So bringing your portfolio back into line is a process called rebalancing. All right, so I think we've hit the end of clip 1, chapter 5, clip 1, and we'll move on to the next clip. Shalom.